Tom Gallagher. Thank you, it's me, Shirley, not Mike Thaller, for coming over to tell us why PDA's San Francisco chapter should vote for you in the challenge to Nancy Pelosi. I've known you for 15 years, since the Dennis Kucinich campaign, and we know all about you from hopefully your Facebook page, your website, and your questionnaire that you so kindly answered. So please tell us more.
Okay, if you insist. A friend of mine said a while ago that she thought it was a funny time to be running against Nancy Pelosi. Not that she wasn't supportive of it, but what she meant was, of course, that Nancy Pelosi is arguably at the apex of her career and probably at the apex of her popularity. So why does one run against her? One way I often put it to people is, if we were to imagine a new candidate for Congress appearing in San Francisco who said that she wasn't a big fan of Medicare for All, who described the Green New Deal as the Green Dream or whatever they call it, who voted for increases in the military budget of the United States, which is already equal to that of the next 7 nations combined, we might say to that candidate, you might want to think about running in a different district. That's not what the people of San Francisco support. But as we know, a candidate who fits that description has in fact been representing San Francisco for the last 32 years. So why run against her now? I don't enter this race because I feel certain that Nancy Pelosi can be beaten. As I explained in the beginning, she's probably at the apex of her popularity. But what I do feel certain of is that any Republican who runs in the race can be beaten if we have unity on the progressive left side. And that's something I'll return to in a few minutes. What can be achieved for sure is that if we do get a Democrat into the final, and not everyone, first of all, might realize that we have a top 2 primary in California, meaning that 2 members of the same party can wind up in the final, and it does happen in certain cases, and it seems logical for it to happen in San Francisco, where Republicans are quite marginal, but the fact is that it has never happened. If it should happen this time for the first time, what I look forward to for sure is a face-off between the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party, some people might call it at this point the Sanders-Warren wing of the Democratic Party, and the establishment wing of the party that Nancy Pelosi represents. And due to her political prominence nationwide, it is a race that will draw an unusual amount of attention. And I think we have the chance to display our beliefs in contrast to the mainstream beliefs of the party, which have not served it well, in my view, to an unusual degree. Whether we can win that in the end remains to be seen, but we can definitely accomplish that. In terms of my candidacy, I often describe myself as a member of the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party since before there was a Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party. When Bernie was the Democratic Socialist mayor of Burlington, Vermont, I was the Democratic Socialist state representative from Boston, Massachusetts, and also went on to serve as the chair of the Progressive Caucus of the Massachusetts House of Representatives. Since coming to San Francisco, I have been president in the past of a local Democratic club, the Bernal Heights Club, for over 15 years. I have chaired the San Francisco Progressive Democrats of America for nearly a decade, only stepping away to run this race. And I've been elected as a Bernie Sanders delegate to the 2016 Democratic Nominating Convention. In terms of the issues that I raised at the beginning, I first started working on single-payer health care in this city the year I moved here, in 1994, when I was on the staff of Proposition 186, a ballot question that would have created a California single-payer health care system. And as participant and chair of the PDA chapter, single payer healthcare, Medicare for all has been one of the, I would say, the two focal points of the chapter's work over the years. As far as the Green New Deal goes, I have sponsored an online petition which has gathered more than 10,000 signatures, calling upon Pelosi to become one of the sponsors of the Green New Deal, which would seem only appropriate given the point of view of most of the people in her district. In terms of military budget, foreign policy, our foreign wars, one of the other focal points of the PDA chapter. In 2008, I wrote, organized, and ultimately passed a proposition that was given the letter U at that time, that declared it San Francisco policy that its elected congressional representatives vote no further funding for the Iraq War. To the best of my knowledge, we were the only city in the country to do something like that. And clearly it did not have full impact on the incumbent. Sometimes she voted for it, sometimes she didn't. In 2018, just last year, I introduced the same language in regard to Afghanistan, no further funding for the Afghanistan war, to the platform of the California Democratic Party. And again, it was adopted, making us, I believe, the only Democratic Party in the country to come out with a stand like that. In the interim, I have offered numerous resolutions regarding those two wars, Syria, Venezuela, Iran, and brought them before the Democratic Central Committee, brought them before numerous local Democratic clubs, and in almost every occasion prevailed over the position that Nancy Pelosi was holding at the time. So you might say I have done my best over the years to bring our wars home. It is not an easy thing to get foreign policy to be considered on the local level, but I have worked on that for many years. To a great degree, I consider running for Pelosi's seat to be a continuation of work that I have done over the years. In short, I believe I have talked plain talk to ordinary people about often difficult, often complicated, often controversial issues for a good long time. In just this race, I have already knocked on thousands of doors, talking to people about whatever might be on their mind, but trying to focus them, of course, on what I think the most important issues are for the district, for the nation. And, you know, the reasons for running go all the way from the apocalyptic to the most mundane individual concerns. Difficult as it is to run against, again, as I say, a speaker at the apex of her popularity, perhaps, I don't think we can afford to look the other way. From the apocalyptic level, you have a group called Youth Against the Apocalypse that makes the very serious argument that if we don't do something along the lines of the Green New Deal, human society is not going to be able to continue on in the fashion to which it has been accustomed. On the individual level, for any of you who still read print newspapers, the Christmas Day edition of the San Francisco Chronicle had as its main story an individual who had to have an amputation of a toe. And the reason it was on the front page of the newspaper is that he had to appeal to public charity. This was an example of the sort of cause that people ought to give at the holiday season. It is a disgrace that this has to be a matter of public charity. So this is an immediate issue for tens of millions of people. And I don't think we can afford to allow ourselves to have a representative in Congress who basically goes for a much more gradualist approach, despite the fact that there are people facing that situation every day as we sit here and talk. I want to say one thing in conclusion about the recent history of this race and how I have chosen to conduct my campaign. Last year, 3 candidates ran as Democrats to the left of Nancy Pelosi. they divided up the 20% or so of the vote among them all to such a degree that a Republican took second place with only 9% of the vote. And as I mentioned, no Democrat has ever made it. This suggested two things to me. One, that we needed unity, and two, those three candidates spent over $225,000 fruitlessly. None of the candidacies succeeded in making it to the final. So it suggested to me also that that kind of money ought not to be spent in the race against other progressives, but should be saved for when one of them reached the final. On the first point, I published an article back in April calling upon progressives and the candidates to come up with something that I called the progressive primary, simply meaning a way to unite behind a single candidate. It has not happened yet. I'm still modestly optimistic that something can happen in the long run, but I am committed to the idea that we not divide up the vote again and allow a Republican in and not have that confrontation that I have spoken about earlier. Secondly, in an attempt not to participate in a repeat of runaway spending, the way I have organized my campaign is I have asked for no contributions over $200, and I don't mean individual, I mean total, cumulative, and I have not hired a fundraiser. The idea being that if everyone were to do something like that, we would minimize the amount of money that was spent running against one another, and we could save for the point when one of us made the final against Pelosi. The result of this is not everyone has seen it that way. At the three-quarter mark of this year, I have been outspent by 30-1. Now, how much these concerns are of importance is really up to the viewing audience here and the people in many other organizations. Can the approach that I've taken running a campaign on as little money as possible rather than on as much money as possible, can that approach succeed in the real world? Again, it's up to you in the viewing audience. I thank you for your time, and I would be very grateful for your support. Thank you.
Thank you.